Hey guys, welcome back. It's May 1st today, and we are going to start getting the differential in, getting everything shimmed up, and then match up the ring and the ring and pinion gears. So first things first, I've already greased up the mating surfaces on both the transmission case and the differential carriers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start let me tilt the camera down just a little bit, move it over so we can see what's going on here. I'm going to start with just barely inserting and aligning the carrier on one side. Now when I say aligning, I'm just making sure that the bolt holes in the carrier are aligned with the holes in the transmission case. So we'll put a couple of temporary bolts in it. Now I've got this set up with one thick and two thin shims on each side. I'll insert the bearing for the differential. Let me grab my drift and hammer. Well, that's not going to work. I'll just give it some light taps until it's seated in the carrier. There we go, we're seated. Now, before we can install the other carrier, we need to install the differential. So we'll lift it into place. Get everything aligned. There we go. Now we can take and install the other side. Now I'm not going to lie to you, I did have everything together once already, but I made a couple mistakes. For one, I installed the differential backwards. So the ring gear was over here. Now that's all well and good if I want to have 5 reverse speeds and 1 forward, but in order to install it properly, it needs to be on the right side, or the brake side of the, I should say the brake pedal side of the transmission case. So now that we got the one side installed, loosely installed, I might add. Oh, too much. I'll get my hammer so I can lightly coerce it. And a couple more bolts to align everything as far as bolt holes go. So because I already had this together, I already established where I need to be as far as my shim packs go to remove any side-to-side play of the differential. So basically you don't want to have any side-to-side play of the differential carrier, but you also don't want to put any stress on the bearings because they're not a tapered roller, so you can't adjust preload on them. There we go. Now I should be able to tighten these down some and bring everything together. So I'll start with the one side here. Just kind of going a little at a time. Until we get everything aligned as far as splines go. And I can tell they're aligned because I can turn the spider gears inside the differential. So we're going to start putting our bolts in. Here, let me move the camera. I'm going to start putting our bolts in around the carrier here. I wish I was not holding the camera because I should have my chest mount out here, but whoops. Getting a little overzealous with the old fingertips here. Alright, so that's one carrier installed. Now we can start pulling this one in. Basically just enough to where I can get the other bolts started. Now these carriers do have a large rubber sealing ring on them, and Haya was generous enough to donate them to the project. So right now all this stuff is going to be set up without any of the sealing rings in place, but that shouldn't affect our side-to-side play or anything like that. Basically, we're doing that because, first of all, we don't want to tear up the rings. You know, when we assemble, disassemble, reassemble, etc. Because in order to get these shim packs right, it's going to take a few tries, and the more we install these and take them out, the better chance we have of tearing up those rubber sealing rings, so it's more beneficial to do it without them in place. Okay, so now our differential is installed. And we probably could put a little bit of lubricant on the bearings to help things along. This is just a general purpose spray lubricant that I'm using. So I'll just spray it liberally in the bearings, give it a few turns. Now, what I've done for research and from what I've read, you do not want any side-to-side play. If anything, you want just a teeny tiny bit. And the way I've got this set up, there is barely any end play. Let me grab our dial indicator. Whoops. And we'll see what we got for end play here. Zero it out. Trying to find a good place to set this. Okay. Maybe if we set it here. It's not exactly working like I planned. Give me a few minutes, I'll get this dial indicator set up and we'll check our side to side. Okay guys, I didn't like the way that this differential was binding up, so I took the carriers back out and I removed a thin shim and installed a thick shim. So now I've got two thick and one thin on each side, and I like the way this rotates a lot better. It freewheels beautifully, doesn't drag like before, and just going off of ear, there's a very, very, very tiny ticking in there. I mean, I can't barely hear it. So go ahead and set our, let me get this thing so I can see it here. Get it zeroed out. And what I'm doing is I've pushed it all the way to one side, zeroed it, and then I pull to the other side. rotate the gear about 180 roughly and do it again just to see where we're at. So push it all the way to one side, make contact and zero it out. And it looks like we got just a couple thousandths, so 2 to 3 thousandths of side to side, if that. It might be right at about 2, just about 2. So that I think we can live with, since there's only one new bearing that we installed in this full set across here, and the other ones aren't bad. They're not making any noise. They're not, you know, you can't feel any pits or anything in the races, or any rust, anything like that. So we're reusing 3 of the 4 bearings on the pinions here. So let's go ahead and keep moving. Next we have to install the pinion shaft, and in order to do that, I first have to finish driving on the new bearing for the front here. So we'll go ahead, finish driving that on, we'll get our front bearing on, and then this is the input shaft. So the input shaft itself actually has 3 bearings. There's an outer for the front, then there's a middle bearing, and in the rear there's a pilot bearing that goes inside here that rides on the end of the pinion shaft itself. So we will drive this on with a brass punch, get it seated, install our spacer on top, and then the front bearing, and then we can slide the top shaft or the pinion shaft in place, and we can check our lash, our contact pattern, and all of that. So stay tuned for that. Okay, again, now this is all kind of trial and error for me because it's been so long since I've taken this apart. But essentially, this top shaft or pinion shaft has 2 shims on it that came when it came apart. So there's a thick and a thin. So we're just going to install it with both and see where we're at. Oops. It's a challenge getting the bolt holes lined up perfectly, so there we go. Grab my wrench. See if I can move the camera here. That way we can get a better angle. Now this bearing we did reuse, the rear bearing on the top shaft. It's held into place with a snap ring. I don't know if you guys can see it there, but there's a groove in the shaft for the snap ring to ride in. So we've got that. We did replace this small pilot shaft or pilot bearing for the input shaft, and that was an expensive little bugger. If you guys go to my previous video, I've got a list of all the bearings, the gaskets, and the seals for the rear end in the description of the last video, but I'll put it in the description of this video as well. So at this point, we can slide in our input shaft and install the carrier. Now I'm thinking, if I remember right, I do have the gasket in place as well. And on this carrier, there is an oil flow hole, so make sure you get the gasket aligned with that. Oop. Now I gotta get my bolt out of the bottom. But actually, what I think I'm gonna do, let me do some thinking here. I think this front bearing needs to be installed with the the input shaft carrier. So let me do some trial and error, and I'll get back to you. I'm so unorganized. Okay guys, this is the easiest way to do it. Install the carrier over the shaft and then put your snap ring on the front. Take the gasket as a unit, slide it into place, tilt the camera down so you can see, slide everything into place, and install our bolts. Now I don't have any of the top shaft gears in place, simply because it's going to be easier to work around inside here without those gears in place. Oh, hold on. I've got the carrier upside down. So we'll spin it. Get it back in place. There we go. Now we're cooking with fire. Oop. There. Sometimes it takes a little bit of moving things around to get it properly seated. So we replaced the front pilot bearing and then the front carrier bearing on this assembly. And there is a nut, or I'm sorry, a bolt on the end of the top shaft with a special washer that holds that pilot bearing in place. And it is common for that nut to work itself loose. I've heard some stories of that happening, so I did put some Loctite on that, or I'm sorry, that bolt. I put some Loctite on that bolt and tightened it to what I felt was a good amount of torque or tightness, and we'll hope for the best. But let me grab a socket. We'll tighten these bolts in the carrier up and see where we're at. Okay guys, we've got everything tight and set up. Let's check the backlash real quick just to see where we're at. Now I'm holding the pinion shaft in place and just very slightly moving the differential, and the gauge measures. Now specs call for 6 to 12 thousandths of backlash, and we've got probably about 10 thousandths or so, which isn't bad at all. That's right within the spec range, especially for a gear set that's probably original. So we're right at about 10 thousandths. Let's go ahead and put some grease on the gears, and we'll see if we can check out the wear pattern at all. Or I'm sorry, the oh, come on, Squatch, help me out. The contact pattern. Okay. Let me grab a couple of gloves. Now some guys use a type of paint marker to check this out, but you can use grease. There's nothing wrong with using grease to see where we're at on the contact pattern. Well, let me let the air compressor run, and I'll get some grease on this stuff, and we'll start recording after that. Okay guys, I'll try to explain this as best I can here. Now I got my service manual out, and it states that to set the correct gear lash or contact area, you should be looking for your removal of grease near the toe of the gear, which is the inside of the ring gear, and it should be from an area here. Maybe I'll just show you in the manual here. So it should be in this area would be your contact pattern. Now if you have a high contact pattern like this, then it states that you should move a shim, or the pinion shaft needs to be moved forward, so you need to add a shim to the front of the shim pack here, which goes right in here. Now if you have a low pattern, then you need to remove a shim and slide the pinion shaft back, which then raises the contact pattern into this area. Now this is designed to be done at no load, because when you put the gears under load, then this contact pattern area will extend to the outward side of the gear. So when it's under stress, the teeth actually will deform, and the contact pattern will extend all the way out. So let's go ahead and rotate this through. I've already done it. Using grease, it's a little bit trickier, but we'll kind of look to see what it does as far as rolling this thing through. So we'll just roll it through all the way. Oh yeah, we're sitting really good. So our contact pattern tends to, I don't know if you guys can see that, but it tends to wean a little bit towards the bottom. So it angles in, but let's rotate it through one more time, see what happens. We'll check the area. Well, now we're just smearing grease, but See if we can get a little on there. We'll move it through again. All right. That should be good enough. I already got a rough idea of where we're sitting, and it's in a nice position, so I'll come back around. Well, for sakes of video purposes, we didn't okay. It's a little bit more difficult to do with grease. But if we rotate it through, and actually this is the direction of forward travel. So when we do that, we should be looking at the back side of the teeth here. And you can see, if you look in the area here, you can see that the grease is removed from pretty much the entire contact area that was previously worn in. Okay, you can, on these teeth, you can see where it's been polished in contact area, and when I rotate it through, the grease is squeezed out of that entire area. So I would say we're sitting just fine with where we're at. This tooth is probably the best example here. If you can see, the contact pattern starts low in the valley, and it's squeezed all the grease out all the way up to the top, full length, right where that polish starts to go away. So we're making really good contact throughout this entire tooth. And the same thing if we go to the next one, there's no grease in this whole area. And that's pretty much where we want to be. So that's good news. I did double check the backlash measurements in our manual, and it's supposed to be 8 to 12 thousandths. I misstated that before when I said 6 to 12. So 8 to 12 thousandths. Our backlash is sitting at 10. Our gears look good. Everything rotates beautifully. So I'm pretty happy with where we're at. We actually got pretty lucky. So now we can remove the top shaft, install all our sliding gears, and unfortunately that's as far as we can go in the rear end. I suppose we could install the PTO, but that's really as far as we can go with the rear end itself. We can assemble the axles, get those ready to go. We can get the shift forks on the bottom side of the transmission cover and get those ready to go. The belly pump is ready to get put together, and the belt pulley as well. So I think we're going to finish up by installing the sliding gear set and putting our gasket sealer on the gasket itself, and then buttoning up the seal carrier for the front here. So let's go ahead and get this shaft out and we'll install the gears. Okay guys, we're going to go ahead and slide the gears in place. So we go with the large gear first, and the shift fork collar always goes towards the rear. Okay, so that's our first gear. This is second and third. And then we got a brand new gear from a donor. This is our fourth, fifth slider. And then we can install that pilot bearing on the front. Now I did put more Loctite on this bolt for the bearing. So we'll tighten that up as soon as we get it installed. So we'll get the front in first. Kind of position the gears like so. This is a challenge to get everything aligned. And I keep dropping stuff, and that doesn't make it any easier. And where did my washer go? Okay. Definitely tight quarters getting it all in here. But it is doable with some wiggling. So we'll get everything installed loosely. And now we can install the input shaft. Oh, before we do that, I gotta tighten that bolt. So let's do that. Now in order to do this, what I did, or what I'm going to do I should say, is I locked up the differential and just gave it enough to make sure it's tight. I just used a piece of scrap steel and wedged it between the teeth. So this input pilot bearing is secured. I'll put a little grease on it to help things along. Okay. And now we can spread our sealer on the gasket for the input shaft and install the input shaft. So let me get that done with the gasket sealer and we'll move on. Okay, our gasket's in place. We're going to go ahead and insert the input shaft. Get everything rotated into position. Be nice if I had a stand kind of like Squatch has for X231 and 5J1113. This thing kind of rocks back and forth just a little bit from the round bottom. I'll go through and snug these up, and then we can install the seal carrier on the front here and the yoke for the drive shaft, which is right here. Alright. Okay guys, I think that's going to do it for this video. That was the, let's see, I guess differential, pinion shaft, and top shaft and sliding gear assembly setup. So we are all sealed up on the front side. We've got our yoke in place. I still have to tighten the coupler for the hydraulic pump, but I think I'll just grab a brass punch and give it a couple whacks, tighten it up, and then we'll be done. Oh, I also did pick up a new expansion plug. I installed it in the access hole for the reverse idler gear shaft, and I used Loctite when I installed it, and after I pined it into place, or punched it into place I guess, then I took some RTV and I went around the recession here just to help seal it so we don't get any leaks there. So that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully it was not too difficult to follow, but we got really lucky as far as the differential. You know, we only had to take it apart essentially twice to try two different shim thicknesses, and then with the pinion shaft, the shims that we already had, one thick and one thin, was all we had to work with, and luckily the first time we put it together everything turned out okay. So from this point I think what's next is we'll finish up the hydraulic pump. All we got to do is install the pump in the reservoir, and then from there we'll move on to the rear axle assembly. So that'll be ready to go. And last we'll put the shift rails on the bottom of the cover. And that should leave us with just the belt pulley. So that's what's the I can't even talk. That's what the plan is. So I guess at this point I'm going to stop the video because I don't want to get too much in a video, because then it just tends to be too much happening in a short amount of time. So that's going to do it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for wrenching with me, and don't forget to check out the GoFundMe. Stay healthy, everybody, and that's all I've got. See you next time.